You built your career on my money and still call me a loser. I'm David, 34, married to Sarah for 8 years. Her younger sister, Emma, 26, just married Ryan. Emma works at a tech investment firm called Nexus Capital in Chicago and thinks she's hot stuff because she pulls 80-hour weeks. Background: I work from home doing investment and consulting work. No fancy office, just me in my study, wearing cargo shorts and making solid money. I like my quiet life, grow tomatoes, read books, manage a portfolio that most people would be impressed by if they knew about it. But I don't advertise my business because I value privacy over ego stroking. See, I got a beautiful wife, a house with good bones, and enough money in the bank to sleep easy at night. What I don't have is the kind of job that impresses 20-something tech folks at wedding rehearsal dinners. The drama started at Emma's rehearsal dinner at Harbor House, this overpriced place that was doing its best impression of class that Friday night. You know the type. Dim Edison bulbs, exposed brick, the kind of place that charges $47 for what they call artisanal mac and cheese, but is really just pasta with fancy cheese. The private dining room was packed with Sarah's family and a bunch of Emma's work friends who looked like they'd stepped out of a LinkedIn ad, fresh haircuts, expensive watches they probably financed, and that particular brand of confidence that comes from having never been truly humbled by life. Emma had been hitting the champagne hard, and her filter was completely gone. She's going on and on to Kevin about how amazing Nexus is, how they only respect winners, really laying it on thick. I was sitting there, minding my own business, working on what had to be the world's most overpriced Caesar salad, when Emma's voice cut through the dinner conversation like a buzzsaw through plywood. Then Emma turns to me with this unpleasant smile. Unlike some people here who don't even have jobs. Dead silence. Mother-in-law Margaret suddenly fascinated by her wine glass. Father-in-law Clive choking on bread. Poor Ryan looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. I felt Sarah's hand find mine, squeezing in that way that says, "I'm sorry, and please don't destroy my sister publicly." She knows when I'm calculating exactly how many ways I could end someone's career before dessert. Everyone thought they knew my story. Unemployed David, the deadbeat brother-in-law who married up while his successful wife pays the bills. I could hear their thoughts. Poor Sarah, stuck with that underachiever. What they didn't know was that I had my fingers in more pies than a bakery owner with commitment issues. See, I like my home office. I like my garden. I like my peace and quiet and the ability to work in sweatpants if I very well please. But that doesn't mean I'm sitting around eating bonbons and watching soap operas all day. I've learned something over the years. People reveal who they really are when they think you can't touch them. When they believe you're beneath them, that's when they show you their true colors. I smiled at Emma. You're absolutely right. I don't have a traditional job. She looked pleased, like she'd solved world hunger. Her work friends did that uncomfortable laugh. Mother-in-law tried smoothing things over. David is very creative with his time. Emma kept going. We all need our hobbies, right? Hobbies. That's what she called my work. I took another bite of my $40 rabbit food and nodded thoughtfully. Absolutely. Everyone needs something to keep them occupied. The conversation moved on to wedding details and work gossip, but I could feel the damage hanging in the air like smoke after a grease fire. Emma had made her point loud and clear in front of her boss, her colleagues, and both our families. I was a loser, a disappointment, someone to be pitted rather than respected. I kept eating my salad and listening to the chatter, watching as Emma basked in what she thought was her moment of triumph. She'd established the pecking order, put me in my place, and shown everyone exactly where she stood in the hierarchy of successful people. What she didn't realize was that she just started a clock ticking. See, I've learned something over the years. People reveal who they really are when they think you can't touch them. When they believe you're beneath them, that's when they show you their true colors. And Emma had just painted herself in shades I wouldn't use to decorate a gas station bathroom. I finished my salad, complimented the bride on her choice of venue for tomorrow, and made small talk about the weather with Uncle Frank, who'd driven down from Milwaukee and had strong opinions about the Cubs' chances this season. All normal, all pleasant, all perfectly civilized. But inside, I was setting a timer, because sometimes the best response to being underestimated isn't to prove people wrong immediately. Sometimes it's better to let them keep digging until they've made a hole so deep they can't climb out of it. Tomorrow was going to be a very interesting day. The drive home was quieter than a library. Sarah kept glancing at me like I might explode. She knows my dangerously calm mode. When I get so upset, I become more polite, which makes me scarier than yelling. "You okay?" she asked. "Peachy," I said, and meant it. I was energized in the way that only comes from watching someone hand you exactly the ammunition needed to completely change their world. At home, I went to my study, my command center, as Sarah lovingly calls my man cave, and I prefer to think of as my war room. Dark wood paneling, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and a desk that's older than most of the tech folks who probably make more in a year than my grandfather made in a decade. It's the kind of room where serious business gets done, even if that business is conducted by a guy in cargo shorts and a Cubs t-shirt. I flicked on the lights, and there it was, hanging on the wall like a trophy from a hunting trip I'd never bothered to brag about, the original Nexus Capital term sheet from 6 years ago, complete with my initials in blue ink right next to Kevin Wolf's signature. Below that, a stack of early pitch decks bound in leather, each one representing a meeting where I'd asked hard questions and written bigger checks than most people see in their retirement accounts. And there, in a simple black frame that cost about $12 at Target, was a photo of Kevin and me from the year Nexus launched. We're both younger, both hungrier, both standing in what used to be their first office, a converted warehouse space that smelled like stale coffee and desperate ambition. Kevin's got his arm around my shoulder, and we're both grinning like people who just figured out how to print money in the basement. We weren't best friends then, and we're not best friends now, but we respected each other, which in the business world is worth about 10 times more than friendship and lasts about 100 times longer. I'd backed Kevin when he was just another MBA with a PowerPoint and a dream. When every other investor in Chicago thought venture capital was either too risky or too boring to bother with. The beautiful thing about that relationship was how quiet it was. My shares in Nexus were held through something called Riverside Holdings, a family investment vehicle that sounded exactly boring enough that nobody ever asked questions about it. No flashy press releases, no mentions in TechCrunch, no ego-stroking interviews about my vision for the future of innovation, just paperwork, signatures, and the kind of steady returns that let me buy organic tomatoes without checking the price. I pulled out my leather notebook, the kind of old-school paper and pen setup that drives young people crazy because they can't figure out how to sync it to their phones. This particular notebook had been with me for 3 years, filled with observations, ideas, and the occasional reminder to pick up dry cleaning or call my mother on her birthday. Tonight, I was adding a new entry. I wrote down the date and then carefully transcribed Emma's exact words from dinner. Unlike some people who don't even have jobs. I noted the time, approximately 8:15 p.m., and the audience, her boss, several colleagues, both sets of parents, and about 20 other witnesses who'd remember this moment for very different reasons than they expected. Then I wrote something else. How she'd used status as a tool, the casual cruelty of someone who'd confused job titles with human worth. I also noted tomorrow's wedding guest list. Several Nexus partners attending. Elena Martinez on their board with a reputation that made CEOs break into cold sweats. Lisa Chun running HR, who could smell workplace drama from 3 time zones. Marcus Johnson handling investor relations. Sophia Torres, their strategy lead, who could calculate the cost-benefit of any decision while ordering company picnic catering. Perfect witnesses for what I was starting to think of as tomorrow's educational moment. The thing is, I wasn't planning revenge. Revenge is what angry people do when they want to hurt someone who hurt them. It's emotional, it's messy, and it usually backfires in spectacular ways that leave everyone worse off than when they started. No, what I was planning was much simpler and infinitely more effective. I was going to turn on the lights. See, most people live their lives in partial darkness, making assumptions about others based on incomplete information and surface-level observations. They see someone working from home and assume he's unemployed. They see someone who doesn't brag about his accomplishments and assume he doesn't have any. They confuse quiet confidence with weakness, humility with failure. Light has this amazing property. It shows you exactly what's been there all along. It doesn't create dust. It just makes visible the dust that was always floating around, invisible until someone flipped the switch. Saturday morning, I went to Armando's tailoring shop. Armando had been making suits in Chicago for 37 years. I needed to look like exactly who I was, not who people thought I was. The charcoal gray wool suit felt like liquid mercury, impeccably made, perfectly fitted, suggesting the wearer has his life together without advertising the fact. Dignity is the cleanest line, Armando said. Everything else is just showing off. From there, First National, where I've been banking for 15 years. Jonathan Pierce had prepared a certified check for $40,000 made out to Emma and Ryan, with wedding gift in the memo line. Significant enough to make an impression without looking like I was buying my way out of trouble. Final stop was an elite transportation booking for a car service. I could have driven myself, but arriving in a professionally chauffeured car sends a different message than pulling up in my Honda. Tonight was about perceptions. Every detail mattered. The Lakeshore Conservatory looked like a fairy tale with an unlimited budget. Glass walls stretched up toward a vaulted ceiling, creating a cathedral of light that made everything glow. Sarah and I arrived right on time. When we stepped out of that black sedan, I caught several people glancing our way with mild curiosity. My suit felt like armor. The ceremony was beautiful. Emma looked stunning in her flowing ivory dress. And despite everything, I wasn't taking away from her moment. Wedding days are sacred, even when the bride spent the previous evening using your supposed failures as entertainment. The reception cocktail hour was when things got interesting. I positioned myself with a clear view of the room. The Nexus crowd had naturally gravitated toward each other near the floor-to-ceiling windows. Kevin holding court, Elena making strategic conversations, Lisa chatting while keeping one eye on team dynamics. Perfect. They were all there, relaxed in party mode, completely unprepared for what was about to unfold. I was on my second bourbon when I saw Emma making her way toward Kevin with a determined stride. She changed into a cocktail dress that probably cost more than most people's rent. Her face was flushed with champagne and the confidence that comes from being the center of attention at your own wedding. "Kevin," she called out, her voice carrying that bright, slightly too loud quality people get when they've had just enough to drink to amplify their personality. "I've been wanting to introduce you to someone." The string quartet hit a melodic passage just as she reached Kevin's group. Several guests turned to see what was happening. Perfect timing. Kevin turned toward her with polite attention. "Of course, Emma. Congratulations again on a beautiful ceremony." "Thank you," she beamed. "But I wanted you to meet my family, specifically my brother-in-law." She gestured toward me with a theatrical flourish. "Kevin, meet David, the unemployed underachiever I was telling you about." There it was. The moment I've been waiting for, delivered with even more public spectacle than I dared hope. The string quartet seemed to miss a note. Several conversations stuttered to a halt as people processed what they just heard. Marcus Johnson's animated gestures froze mid-motion. Lisa looked up with sharp attention, her HR instincts screaming warnings. Elena's eyebrows rose half an inch, which in boardroom terms was equivalent to shouting, "What on earth?" But Kevin just looked at me with that calm, unreadable expression that had probably made startup founders break into cold sweats. He studied my face for what felt like an eternity, his eyes moving from my carefully chosen suit to my perfectly knotted tie to the platinum tie bar that caught the conservatory's light. Then slowly, his expression changed. The polite mask slipped away, replaced by recognition, surprise, and definite amusement. A smile started at the corners of his mouth and spread across his face like a sunrise. "Well, I'll be darned," he said, loud enough for the growing circle of suddenly attentive guests to hear clearly. He stepped forward and clapped a hand on my shoulder with genuine warmth. "David Mitchell, how are you?" The atmosphere shifted like a weather front. I could feel confusion rippling outward as people tried to reconcile Kevin's warm recognition with Emma's introduction of me as an unemployed underachiever. Emma's triumphant expression flickered like a candle in a sudden breeze. "You know each other? Know each other?" Kevin's laugh had genuine warmth you can't fake. "Emma, I don't think you understand." He turned back to me, still smiling. "How long has it been?" 2 years since we had coffee." "About that," I said, keeping my voice casual despite my heart beating like a drum solo. "Good to see you, Kevin." The circle of observers was growing as other guests sensed the drama and drifted over. Margaret had abandoned her conversation and was moving closer with the expression of a mother hen whose chicks were under attack. "But he doesn't work." Emma's voice rising toward panic. "David doesn't, he doesn't work." "Doesn't work?" Kevin asked, and there was something in his tone that made it clear this wasn't rhetorical. The moment stretched while Emma's champagne-fueled confidence began its rapid descent into stone-cold sobriety. "He doesn't have a job," she said finally, smaller and less certain. "Sarah supports him." The silence made everyone hyper-aware of the background noise, the string quartet, clinking glasses, distant conversations. Kevin looked at Emma for a long moment, then back at me, then at the growing crowd. Elena had moved closer, her board member instincts activated. Lisa looked like she was mentally composing incident reports. Marcus had the expression of someone watching a slow-motion accident. Then Kevin smiled again, but this time it wasn't warm. This time it was the kind of smile executives give right before explaining why your department is being eliminated. Emma, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly attentive crowd. You're dismissed. The words landed like a meteor hitting the conservatory floor. Several guests made involuntary sounds of surprise. Someone's champagne glass slipped and shattered against stone with a crash that seemed to echo forever. Emma's face went through 5 expressions in 2 seconds. Confusion, disbelief, panic, anger, and desperate hope that this was some elaborate joke. What? Barely a whisper. This is a joke, right? It's my wedding day. No, Kevin said, steady and without humor. It's not. The silence shattered into whispered conversations, sharp intakes of breath, and nervous energy filling the room. You can't be serious, Emma said, gaining volume as the shock wore off. Kevin, this is my wedding day. There are 100 people here. This is unbelievable. Kevin didn't raise his voice. When you've spent years making decisions affecting people's lives, you develop a calm authority that makes raising your voice unnecessary. No, Emma, he said, each word clear and measured. What's unbelievable is mocking a family member at the dinner table. What's unacceptable is using someone's perceived status as entertainment for colleagues. What's inexcusable is thinking cruelty is acceptable as long as you're directing it at someone you consider beneath you. The crowd had grown to maybe 30 people, including most of the Nexus team. Margaret was pushing through with the expression of a mother hen whose chicks were under attack. But he doesn't work? Emma's voice climbing toward distress. He sits at home all day while Sarah pays the bills. I was just being honest. That's when Elena stepped forward, moving through the crowd like a ship cutting through water. Honest about what? Exactly? Elena asked with the polite interest executives use when about to dismantle someone's argument. What do you actually know about David's professional situation? Emma looked like she'd been asked to solve calculus while juggling. He doesn't have a job. Everyone knows he's been unemployed for years. Everyone knows that, Elena repeated, somehow making it sound ridiculous. Based on what information? Based on the fact that he doesn't go to an office. Emma's composure completely gone. He stays home. H.E. Gardens. He doesn't talk about work because he doesn't have any. Lisa had materialized at Elena's shoulder. She was holding her phone, probably recording for future reference. So, Lisa said in a carefully neutral tone, your assessment of someone's professional worth is based entirely on whether they commute to a traditional office environment. That's not. Emma started, then stopped, realizing she was digging deeper with every word. Look, this is ridiculous, Kevin. You know I'm a good employee. I bring in clients, close deals, work 80-hour weeks. You can't let me go because of family drama. Kevin's expression didn't change, but something shifted that made it clear he was about to deliver what corporate America calls a teachable moment. You're right about one thing, he said. You do work hard. You are smart. You have closed deals and brought in clients. He paused. But respect isn't optional at Nexus Capital. It's not something you turn off with family, or when you think someone can't affect your career, or when you've had drinks and want to impress colleagues. When you introduced David as an unemployed underachiever, Kevin continued, you weren't just being cruel to family. You were demonstrating exactly how you treat people when you think they have no power to affect your life. That's when Kevin delivered the final point. David Mitchell, he said, looking directly at Emma, but speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear, wrote the bridge financing that kept Nexus Capital alive when our runway was 6 weeks and every other investor in Chicago thought we were too risky to touch. The silence was so complete, I could hear my heartbeat. He backed this firm when no one else would. Kevin continued, gaining strength with each word. When we were 3 guys in a converted warehouse living on ramen and venture capital dreams, David wrote a check that let us survive long enough to prove our concept. He asked for nothing public. No press releases, no board seat, no ego stroking, just equity and faith. Emma's face had gone through several color changes, finally settling on a pale that matched her wedding dress. That's not, he never said. Why would he? Elena asked, something approaching pity in her voice. Why would anyone advertise their investment portfolio to family members who clearly measure human worth by job titles and office addresses? Every deal you've closed, Kevin said, his words falling like stones into still water. Every client you've brought in, every commission you've earned, it was all built on the foundation David provided when this company was nothing but an idea and a prayer. He paused, then delivered the final point. You sold deals with his trust behind you, Emma. You built your career on his investment, and then you called him an underachiever to impress me. Kevin's smile was cool and composed. That level of professional and personal judgment disqualifies you from representing this firm in any capacity. That's when I decided it was time to do what I'd come here to do. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the envelope Jonathan Pierce had prepared that morning. "Emma," I said, stepping forward and extending the envelope toward her. "This was always going to be your wedding gift. It still is." She stared at the envelope like it might explode, cycling between confusion, suspicion, and hope. "I don't understand." "Open it," I said simply. With shaking hands, she opened the envelope and pulled out the check. I watched her eyes scan the amount, then widen as the number registered. $40,000, she whispered, looking up with an expression I'd never seen on her face. "Why would you? After what I said? After what just happened?" "Because weddings deserve clean starts," I said, loud enough for the observers to hear. "And because I was family yesterday, I'm family today, and I'll be family tomorrow. The money isn't contingent on your job, your apologies, or your opinion of me." Sarah appeared at my side. "The check was David's idea," she said, addressing both Emma and the witnesses. "He ordered it yesterday morning, before the rehearsal dinner, before anything that happened last night." The implications hit Emma like a physical blow. She'd called me an underachiever at dinner, not knowing I'd already planned to give her and Ryan enough money to pay off student loans, make a house down payment, or start an emergency fund most young couples only dream about. "I don't deserve this," she said, barely above a whisper. "Maybe not," I agreed, which wasn't entirely diplomatic, but was honest. "But Ryan does. And more importantly, this isn't about what anyone deserves. It's about what family does for family, even when family makes mistakes." "The money isn't the lesson, Emma," I said finally. "The lesson is that actions have consequences, but family is family. You lost your position tonight because of choices you made. You're getting this gift because of choices I made. Two different things, based on two different sets of values." She nodded slowly, tears tracking down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "David, I'm so sorry." "I know," I said. And I did. The apology wasn't going to undo the damage, but it was a start. That's when Lisa stepped forward with professional composure. "Emma," she said, "obviously this situation is unprecedented, and we need to handle the transition fairly. We're going to structure your exit properly." Emma looked up from the check. "What does that mean exactly?" "Paid leave through month's end, health coverage continuation for 60 days, and a reference letter focusing on your professional achievements rather than today's incident." The relief crossing Emma's face was obvious. Whatever else happened, she wasn't going to be left completely without support. However, Lisa continued, "If you're interested in potential future opportunities with Nexus, there would be conditions." Elena moved closer. This was a board-level decision being made in real time at a wedding reception. 6 months minimum before any reapplication consideration, Elena said. Completion of professional development coaching focused on leadership, empathy, and unconscious bias. Documentation of 40 hours of volunteer work with workforce development or career transition nonprofits. And Lisa added with emphasis, absolutely no social media documentation of the volunteer work. No LinkedIn posts about your personal growth journey. The work has to be genuine service, not reputation management. They'd outlined a program that would either help Emma become a better person or prove she was more interested in appearances than growth. Emma was nodding earnestly. "Yes, absolutely. I could do all that. I want to do all that." But then she stopped and looked directly at me. "David," she said, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. "What do you think? Do you think I deserve a second chance?" I studied her face, looking for signs of genuine remorse versus performative regret. What I saw was exhaustion, embarrassment, and something that might have been the beginning of real self-awareness. "I think," I said carefully, "that you've spent years confusing success with worth and titles with character. Last night, you didn't see a person when you looked at me. You saw a label, unemployed, and you decided that label told you everything about my value as a human being." She winced, but didn't look away, which was progress. "The question isn't whether you deserve a second chance," I continued. "The question is whether you want to become the kind of person who sees people instead of resumes. Because if you do this program, if you put in the work, if you actually volunteer 40 hours helping people find jobs without posting about it on social media, you might learn something important about what really matters." I paused. "You don't have to like me, Emma. You don't have to think I'm successful or impressive. But you do have to stop ranking human beings by their job titles, income levels, or LinkedIn profiles. If you want back into professional rooms, you need to come as a human being first and an employee second." Tears were streaming down her face now, destroying her wedding makeup, but she didn't seem to care anymore. "I didn't see you," she whispered. "I didn't see you at all." "No," I agreed. "You didn't." Kevin stepped forward. "The eligibility stands," he said. 6 months of coaching, volunteer work, no social media documentation. If you complete all that successfully, we'll consider a conversation about future opportunities. But understand, Elena added, this is a one-time offer. If you reapply and we determine you haven't genuinely grown from this experience, there won't be a third chance. Emma nodded earnestly. "I understand. Thank you, all of you. I know I don't deserve this, but I won't waste it. Sometimes mercy looks like consequences. Sometimes second chances come with conditions. And sometimes the best way to teach someone about respect is to show them what it looks like when offered freely, even when it hasn't been earned." 3 months later, I got an email from Lisa. Emma had completed her volunteer hours at Harbor Mission. The program directors said they'd never had a volunteer work as hard or with as much genuine commitment. She'd been running resume workshops, mock interviews, and job search strategy groups. Several clients specifically requested to continue working with her even after her 40 hours were complete. Her coaching sessions were going well, too, with significant progress in recognizing unconscious bias, though she was still working on distinguishing between confidence and arrogance. No social media posts, no public relations efforts, no attempts to turn the experience into personal branding content, just work. Emma called Sarah last week to apologize. Really apologize. Not the kind of sorry you say when you want something to go away, but the kind you say when you've figured out what you did wrong. She told Sarah about working with people at Harbor Mission who'd been out of work for months or years, not by choice, but by circumstance. Said it was the first time she'd really understood the difference between being unemployed and being a failure. She said she'd spent 3 hours helping a man named Frank who'd been laid off from steel mill 2 years ago and couldn't figure out how to translate his skills into something that made sense to 20-something HR managers who'd never worked with their hands. She said Frank reminded her of me, except he didn't have the luxury of keeping his situation private. That hit me harder than I'd expected. The idea that Emma had spent time with someone genuinely struggling, not because of poor choices, but because of economic forces beyond their control, and had connected that experience to her treatment of me, suggested a level of self-awareness I honestly hadn't been sure she was capable of developing. Emma asked if I'd be willing to have coffee with her sometime. No agenda, no asks, just a conversation between family members trying to figure out how to be family again. We met at a small cafe near Harbor Mission 3 weeks later. She looked different, less polished, more comfortable, like someone who'd stopped worrying quite so much about impressing strangers. We talked for 2 hours about everything except work. She told me about Frank, who'd landed a job as a manufacturing coordinator after she'd helped him reframe his experience in language tech companies could understand. When she left, she hugged me goodbye. Not the obligatory family event hug, but the kind that suggests you actually like the person you're hugging. 2 months after that, Kevin called to tell me Emma had reapplied to Nexus. Her coaching was complete. Her volunteer work had expanded into a regular commitment, and her supervisor had written a recommendation suggesting genuine personal growth rather than performative rehabilitation. "What do you think?" he asked. I said, looking out of my winter garden where next year's possibilities were sleeping under the soil, that people can change if they want it badly enough. And I think Emma wants to. She got the job. A different role, smaller territory, but a real second chance based on real growth. At Sunday dinner last week, she sat across from me and said, "I didn't see people before. I saw stepping stones. Stepping stones are fine for gardens," I told her, "just not for hearts." She laughed, then cried, then thanked Sarah for standing between us until we could stand together. Respect, it turns out, isn't just theory. It's policy. It's practice. And in our family, it's now a rule. Never call someone an underachiever when you've never bothered to ask them who they really are. And if you forget, well, there's enough light in this house to remind you.